The day has ended. Whatever you carried with you, the weight of tasks, the noise of voices, the pull of tomorrow, you can set it down now. There is nothing you need to solve tonight, nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to become. You are here, and that is enough. Let your body find its place. Let the pillow hold the weight of your head. Let the blanket settle around you like the air settles around a mountain at dusk. You don't need to force anything. Just allow yourself to be held. Your breath can slow now. There's no rhythm you need to follow, no pattern you need to create. Just let your lungs fill and empty the way they know how, the way they've been doing since you were born. Trust that. Tonight I have a few stories to share with you. They come from the mountains, from temples tucked into valleys where the mist rises slow and the bells ring only when the wind is right. These are not grand tales. They are small, quiet moments. Stories of monks who walked alone, of tea brewed in silence, of lessons learned by watching the way snow falls or the way a river bends. There is no hurry in these stories. They will unfold the way evening light fades, gently, without announcement. And if you drift away before they end, that is exactly as it should be. The stories will continue without you, the way the river continues to flow, whether anyone is watching or not. So close your eyes if you haven't already. Let your jaw unclench. Let your tongue rest in your mouth. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears just a little. There's nothing to grip, nothing to hold on to. There was once a young monk who lived in a temple high in the mountains. The temple was small, built of weathered wood and stone, and it sat on a ledge overlooking a valley so deep that clouds would settle into it like water in a basin. From the courtyard, you could look down and see nothing but white, an ocean of mist that filled the space between the peaks. The monk's name was Kozen, and he had come to the temple 3 winters before, seeking something he could not name. He had grown up in a coastal town where the streets were crowded and the air smelled of salt and fish. His father was a merchant, his mother a weaver. They had expected him to take over the family business, to marry, to continue the line. But Kosen had felt a restlessness he couldn't explain, a sense that there was something else, something quieter, waiting for him. So one autumn morning, when he was 20 years old, he had packed a small bag, left a note for his parents, and walked inland. He walked for weeks, sleeping in fields and barns, eating rice balls he bought in villages along the way. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he needed to go. When he reached the mountains, something in him settled. The air was thinner here, colder. The sky seemed wider. He followed a path that led up and up, through forests of pine and cedar, past streams that ran clear and fast over smooth stones. And then one afternoon, as he rounded a bend in the trail, he saw it, the temple. It was smaller than he had imagined a temple would be, just a cluster of wooden buildings with sloped roofs surrounded by a low stone wall. Prayer flags hung from the eaves, their colors faded by sun and rain. Smoke rose from a chimney, the sound of a bell, soft and deep, drifted down the path toward him. He stood there for a long time, looking up at it. Then he climbed the last stretch of path and knocked on the gate. An old monk answered. His face was lined and weathered, his head shaved smooth. He looked at Kosen for a long moment, saying nothing. Then he stepped aside and gestured for Kosen to enter. That was how Kosen came to live at the temple. The temple was home to only 5 monks, including the abbot, an old man named Risan who moved slowly and spoke even more slowly. Risan's voice was like the sound of stones shifting in a streambed, low, unhurried, always present, but never imposing. He had been at the temple for 40 years, longer than anyone else. Some said he had been born in the valley below and had climbed to the temple as a boy. Others said he had come from a distant province, fleeing some great sorrow, but no one asked, and Raisan never said. The other monks were quiet men, each absorbed in his own practice. There was Gentoku, who tended the garden and rarely spoke. There was Hoseki, who spent his days copying sutras in careful, elegant script. There was Myoshin, the youngest besides Kosen, who had arrived only a year before and still struggled with the long hours of meditation. Kosen's days were simple. He woke before dawn, when the sky was still black and the stars were sharp as pins. He would rise from his mat, splash cold water on his face, and join the others in the main hall for morning meditation. They would sit in rows facing the wall as the darkness outside slowly gave way to grey, then blue, then gold. After meditation, there was breakfast: rice, pickled vegetables, miso soup. They ate in silence, the only sounds the scrape of chopsticks against bowls, the quiet slurp of tea. Then the work began. Kosen's task was to sweep the courtyard, to carry water from the spring, to gather firewood from the forest below. In the afternoons he would sit in meditation again, or study the sutras, or help Gentoku in the garden, pulling weeds and watering the rows of radishes and greens. In the evenings, they gathered in the main hall once more. Risan would light a stick of incense, and they would sit together as the smoke curled upward, thin and grey. Sometimes Risan would speak, his voice soft and measured, telling stories from the old teachings. Sometimes he would say nothing at all, and they would simply sit, listening to the wind move through the pines, listening to the distant sound of water running over rocks. It was a life of great simplicity, and yet Kosen struggled. He had come to the mountains to find peace, but peace eluded him. His mind was restless. During meditation, he could not sit still. His legs ached, his back hurt. His thoughts raced about the village he had left behind, about his parents, about whether he had made the right choice. He thought about the future, about whether he would ever feel the calm that seemed to radiate so easily from Risan and the others. He tried to push the thoughts away, to force his mind to be still, but the harder he tried, the louder the thoughts became. One evening, after the others had gone to sleep, Kosen sat alone on the temple steps. The night was cool and the stars were so bright they seemed to hum. He could hear the wind moving through the pines below, a long, slow exhale that never seemed to end. He could hear the faint trickle of the stream that ran alongside the temple, the sound of water finding its way over stones. He felt defeated. He had been at the temple for 3 years, and he still had not found what he was looking for. He still could not quiet his mind. He still felt the same restlessness he had felt in the coastal town, the same sense that something was missing. Risan appeared beside him, his footsteps so soft that Kosen hadn't heard him approach. The old monk said nothing. He simply sat down on the step, folding his hands in his lap, and looked out at the valley. The mist had settled in for the night, and the valley was invisible, a dark absence between the peaks. They sat in silence for a long time. Kosen could feel the presence of the old man beside him, solid and calm, like a stone that had been sitting in the same place for centuries. Finally, Kosen spoke. His voice was quiet, almost apologetic. "Master, I don't know if I belong here. I try to be still, but my mind won't stop. I try to let go, but I keep holding on. Maybe I'm not meant for this life." Risan nodded slowly. He did not look at Kosen. He continued to gaze out at the darkness, at the faint silver line of the river far below, visible only as a pale thread in the moonlight. "Do you hear the wind?" Risan asked. Kosen listened. The wind was there, constant, moving through the trees in long, slow waves. "Yes," he said. "Does it try to be wind?" Kosen paused, unsure how to answer. "No, I suppose not. It just is." "Does it hold itself still when it wants to move?" "No." "Does it force itself to move when it wants to rest?" "No." Risan smiled, just barely, the corners of his mouth lifting almost imperceptibly. The wind doesn't fight with itself. It moves when it moves. It rests when it rests. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wonder if it's doing it right. It simply is. Kosen frowned, trying to understand. "But I want to be calm. I want to stop thinking so much. Isn't that the point of all this? To find peace?" Risan turned to look at him for the first time. His eyes were dark and deep, like wells. "That wanting," he said gently, "is also the wind. Let it move through you. Don't try to stop it. Don't try to hold it. Just notice it, the way you notice the trees swaying." Kosen opened his mouth to respond, but Risan raised a hand, stopping him. "You think peace is something you find, but peace is not a place you arrive at. It's not a state you achieve. It's what remains when you stop fighting." They sat together until the cold drove them inside. Kosen did not feel suddenly calm. His mind was still churning, still full of questions, but something in him had shifted, just a little. He had heard the wind before, countless times, but tonight he had listened to it differently. The next morning, he woke before dawn, as always. He splashed cold water on his face, the shock of it bringing him fully awake. He joined the others in the main hall and sat facing the wall. His mind wandered almost immediately. Thoughts came and went, memories of his childhood, worries about the future, a fleeting image of his mother's face. But this time, he did not fight them. He let them move through him, the way the wind moves through the valley. And in the spaces between thoughts, in the brief pauses when one thought ended and another had not yet begun, he found something he had not noticed before. Stillness was not the absence of movement, it was the presence of space. Days passed, then weeks. Kosen continued his routines, sweeping the courtyard, carrying water, gathering wood. His mind continued to churn, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to notice the moments when his thoughts quieted on their own. He noticed the feeling of cold water on his hands when he washed the rice. He noticed the weight of the firewood on his back as he carried it up the mountain path. He noticed the way sunlight touched the stone path in the afternoon, turning it gold. One morning, he was walking down the mountain to gather wood when he saw a bird perched on a low branch. It was small, grey, unremarkable, just a little mountain sparrow, the kind he had seen 1,000 times. But it sat so still, so completely at ease that Kosen stopped walking. He stood there breathing quietly and watched the bird. It did not fidget. It did not look around anxiously. It simply sat, its small chest rising and falling with each breath, being exactly what it was. Kosen felt something open inside him. The bird wasn't trying to be peaceful. It wasn't meditating. It wasn't seeking enlightenment. It was just sitting on a branch, alive, present, complete. He smiled. He bowed to the bird. a small, instinctive gesture of gratitude. Then he continued down the path, the bundle of firewood growing heavier on his back, his breath steady and slow. That evening, Rizan asked him, "Did you find what you were looking for today?" Kosen thought for a moment. Then he said, "I don't think I was looking for anything. I just walked." Rizan nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Good." And the temple bell rang, once, clear and soft, as the sun slipped behind the ridge and the first stars began to appear in the deepening blue sky. Far from the mountains, in a village at the edge of a wide river, there lived an old woman who made tea. Her name was Fumiko, and her tea house was a small wooden building with a sloped roof and a single window that faced the water. The building was old, older than Fumiko herself, and the wood had turned grey with age, smooth and soft to the touch. Inside, there were only 4 low tables, each worn from years of use, and a shelf lined with jars of tea leaves, green tea, roasted barley, chrysanthemum, jasmine, oolong. Fumiko had run the tea house for 40 years. She had inherited it from her mother, who had inherited it from her mother before that. The tea house had been in the family for 3 generations, and in all that time, it had never changed. The same tables, the same shelf, the same iron kettle that sat on the same hearth. Fumiko had no family now, no husband, no children. She had been married once, long ago, but her husband had died young, drowned in the river during a spring flood. They had been married only 2 years. After his death, she had devoted herself to the tea house, rising each morning before the sun, boiling water, preparing for the day. The village was quiet. Most people worked in the fields or in the small workshops along the main road. Weavers, potters, blacksmiths. They came to Fumiko's tea house in the early morning or late afternoon, seeking a moment of rest. She never spoke much. When they entered, she would greet them with a small nod, barely perceptible, and then disappear into the back room. A few minutes later, she would return with a cup of tea, setting it down gently in front of them, the surface of the liquid perfectly still. Then she would return to her place by the window, sitting on a low stool, watching the river move past. The river was wide and slow, its surface dark and smooth. In the mornings, mist would rise from it, and the far bank would disappear into white. In the afternoons, the light would turn the water gold. In the evenings, it would turn black, reflecting the first stars. People said Fumiko made the best tea in the region. Travelers would sometimes come from distant towns, having heard rumors of the old woman whose tea could calm even the most restless heart. But when they asked her secret, she would only smile, a small, private smile, and say, "I just use water and leaves." One autumn, a young man came to the village. His name was Daiichi, and he had traveled from the city, where he had worked as a clerk in a trading house. He had spent his days bent over ledgers, recording transactions, calculating profits and losses. The work had been steady, well-paying, but it had left him feeling hollow. He felt like a machine, performing the same tasks over and over, his life reduced to numbers on a page. So one day, without telling anyone, he had quit. He had packed a small bag, left his apartment, and started walking. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he needed to find something real, something he could do with his hands, something that would make him feel alive. He walked for weeks, stopping in villages along the way, asking if anyone needed help. He tried working for a blacksmith, but the heat and noise of the forge overwhelmed him. He tried working for a carpenter, but the precision required, the need to measure everything exactly, to cut each joint perfectly, exhausted him. He tried working for a potter, but his hands were clumsy, and every bowl he made cracked in the kiln. He began to feel hopeless. Maybe he wasn't meant to do anything with his hands. Maybe he was only good for ledgers and numbers. One evening, frustrated and uncertain, he wandered into Fumiko's tea house. He had passed it several times during his stay in the village but had never gone in. Now, with nowhere else to go, he pushed open the door and stepped inside. The space was dim and warm. A small fire burned in the hearth, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and tea. There was no one else there. Daiichi sat at one of the low tables and waited. Fumiko emerged from the back room. She was small, her back slightly bent, her hair white and tied in a simple knot. She looked at him with dark, calm eyes and said nothing. Then she turned and disappeared again. A few minutes later, she returned with a cup of tea. The cup was simple, unglazed clay, slightly rough to the touch. The tea inside was pale green, almost translucent. Steam rose from it in thin, wavering lines. The scent was faint, grassy, clean, with a hint of something sweet. Daiichi lifted the cup to his lips and drank. The tea was hot, but not too hot. It had a delicate flavor, subtle, almost elusive. He couldn't quite name it, but as he drank, something inside him began to settle. The tightness in his chest loosened. His shoulders, which had been hunched up near his ears, dropped. He felt his breath deepen. He sat there for a long time, holding the empty cup, watching the light fade over the river through the window. The water turned from gold to grey to black. Fumiko sat by the window, unmoving, her hands folded in her lap. When Daiichi finally stood to leave, he bowed to her. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded. He returned the next day, and the day after that. Each time, Fumiko prepared his tea in silence, and each time, Daiichi felt something settle inside him. The restlessness that had driven him from the city, the sense of being lost, began to fade, replaced by something he couldn't quite name. A sense of presence, of being here, now, in this moment. After a week, he worked up the courage to ask, "Would you teach me?" Fumiko looked at him for a long moment. Her face was unreadable. Then she nodded once. And so Daiichi became her apprentice. At first, he thought he would learn the secret techniques, the way to select leaves, the temperature of the water, the timing of the pour. But Fumiko did not teach him any of that. Instead, on his first day, she handed him a broom. "Sweep," she said, so he swept. He swept the floor of the tea house, the wooden planks worn smooth by decades of footsteps. He swept carefully, methodically, making sure to get into the corners, under the tables. When he finished, Fumiko inspected his work with a glance, then handed him a cloth. "Wash the cups." He washed the cups. There were only a dozen or so, each one slightly different, some clay, some porcelain, some chipped, some smooth. He washed each one carefully, drying it with the cloth, setting it back on the shelf. When he finished, Fumiko nodded. "Good, come back tomorrow." The next day, he swept again and washed the cups again. Then he wiped down the tables. The day after that, the same, and the day after that. Weeks passed. Daiichi grew impatient. He had come here to learn to make tea, not to be a cleaner. But whenever he opened his mouth to ask, something in Fumiko's presence stopped him. She moved with such quiet purpose, such unhurried grace, that he felt ashamed of his impatience. So he kept sweeping. He kept washing. He kept wiping. and slowly, without noticing, he began to change. The act of sweeping became meditative. He noticed the way the bristles of the broom whispered across the floor. He noticed the pattern of the wood grain, the small knots and whirls. He noticed the way dust gathered in certain corners, the way light came through the window at different times of day. Washing the cups became a ritual. He learned to feel the weight of each one, the texture of the clay or porcelain under his fingers. He learned to rinse them thoroughly, to dry them so that no water spots remained. He began to appreciate the small differences between them. This one slightly heavier, that one with a rougher glaze. One morning, after 2 months had passed, Fumiko handed him a jar of tea leaves. "Make tea for me," she said. Daiichi's hands trembled slightly. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He measured the leaves carefully, the way he had watched her do countless times. He heated the water, checking the temperature with the back of his hand. When it was ready, he poured slowly, watching the leaves unfurl in the water, releasing their color and scent. He waited the proper amount of time, then poured the tea into a cup and brought it to her. Fumiko lifted the cup and sipped. Her face remained expressionless. She set the cup down. "It's good," she said, "but you're thinking too much." Daiichi frowned. "What do you mean? When you sweep, do you think about sweeping?" He paused, considering. "No, I just sweep. When you wash the cups, I just wash them. Then just make tea." Something clicked. Daiichi realized that all the sweeping, all the washing, all the waiting, it had not been preparation. It had been the teaching itself. He had learned to move without thinking, to act without forcing, to be present in each small task. The tea was no different. He made tea again. This time, he did not measure carefully. He did not obsess over the temperature. He simply moved, allowing his hands to do what they had learned, trusting the knowledge that had settled into his body over weeks of practice. When Fumiko tasted it, she smiled, a real smile, warm and approving. "Better," she said. Daiichi stayed in the village. He worked alongside Fumiko for many years, learning not just how to make tea, but how to be present, how to find the sacred in the simple. Eventually, when Fumiko grew too old to manage the tea house, he took over. She moved into the back room, spending her days sitting by the window, watching the river. People still came for the tea. They still said it was the best in the region. And when they asked Daiichi the secret, he would smile, a small, private smile just like Fumiko, and say, "I just use water and leaves." And outside, the river continued to flow, slow and dark and steady, the same as it always had, the same as it always would. Far to the north, where the mountains turn white for half the year, there was a monastery built into the side of a cliff. It was difficult to reach. Pilgrims had to climb a narrow trail that switchbacked up the rock face, exposed to wind and weather. In winter, the path was often impassable, buried under snow, and the monastery would be cut off from the world for months at a time. But those who made the journey found a place of deep quiet. The monastery was home to 12 monks, all of whom had taken vows of silence. They communicated through gestures, through the ringing of bells, through the tasks they shared. They grew vegetables in a small terraced garden carved into the mountainside. Hardy greens, radishes, turnips that could survive the short growing season. They collected snowmelt in wooden barrels. They sat together in meditation each morning and each evening, their breath rising in white clouds in the cold air. The main hall was simple, a large room with a stone floor and wooden beams blackened by years of smoke from the fire pit in the center. There were no decorations, no statues, nothing to distract from the practice. Just the walls, the floor, the cushions arranged in neat rows, and the silence. Among the 12 monks was a man named Shugen. He had come to the monastery as a young man fleeing a life of grief. His wife had died in childbirth, and the child had died with her. He had held his wife's hand as she slipped away, had held his daughter who had never drawn breath, and something inside him had broken. He had been unable to bear the emptiness that followed. The house they had shared became unbearable. Every corner reminded him of her. The bed where she had slept, the loom where she had woven cloth, the small cradle he had built with his own hands waiting empty. So he had walked away. He had walked north into the mountains without plan or destination. He walked until he could walk no more, and when he looked up he saw the monastery clinging to the cliff face like a bird's nest. He had been there for 15 years. Shugen was known among the other monks for his stillness. When he sat in meditation, he did not move, not even when the cold bit into his skin, not even when his legs ached, not even when hours passed. He could sit from dawn until midday without shifting, his breath so slow and quiet that it seemed he might not be breathing at all. The others respected him. They saw his discipline, his dedication. They thought he had achieved what they were all striving for, perfect stillness, perfect peace. But they were wrong. Inside, Shugen was not still. Inside, he carried the weight of his loss like a stone lodged in his chest. He had come to the mountains to escape it, but it had followed him. At night, when the wind howled against the monastery walls, shaking the shutters, he would lie awake on his mat, staring into the darkness, remembering. He remembered his wife's voice, the way she laughed. He remembered the way her hand felt in his, small and warm. He remembered the curve of her belly in the last months, the way she would place his hand there so he could feel the baby kick. He had thought that if he meditated long enough, deeply enough, the pain would dissolve. But it never did. It remained a constant presence, heavy and cold. One winter, a new monk arrived at the monastery. His name was Kaio, and he was young, maybe 25, with an open face and bright eyes. Unlike the others who carried an air of solemnity, Kaio seemed unburdened. He smiled easily. He hummed while he worked, a soft, wordless melody. He seemed to move through the world lightly, as if he had never known sorrow. Shugen found Kaio's presence unsettling. How could someone be so light? How could someone live without carrying the weight of the world? It seemed almost disrespectful, almost naive. One evening, after the meditation session had ended and the others had retired to their cells, Shugen found Kaio sitting outside on the stone steps that led down from the main hall. The sun had just set and the sky was a deep, cold blue. The peaks around them glowed faintly pink in the last light, then faded to grey. Shugen hesitated, then sat beside him. They sat in silence for a while, their breath visible in the cold air. Finally, Shugen gestured. A simple question formed with his hands. "Why are you so happy?" Kaio looked at him for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he gestured back, his hands moving slowly, deliberately. "I am not always happy, but I do not fight the sadness when it comes." Shugen frowned. He gestured again, more urgently. "I have tried to let go, but I cannot." Kaio smiled gently. He looked around, then reached down and scooped up a handful of snow from the steps. He held it in his palm, and they both watched as it began to melt immediately, water pooling in the creases of his skin. He held it until the snow was almost gone, until only water remained, cold and clear. Then he opened his hand and let the water drip through his fingers back onto the ground where it would freeze again by morning. He looked at Shugen and gestured. "You are holding snow. Let it melt. Let it return." Shugen stared at his own hands, clenched into fists on his knees. He had been gripping so tightly for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to let go. That night, he sat in meditation in his cell. The monastery was silent except for the wind. He closed his eyes and, instead of trying to push the grief away as he had done for 15 years, he let it come. He remembered his wife. He remembered his daughter. He let the sorrow rise, and he did not fight it. He let it fill him, let it move through him like water, like wind. And as he sat there, something strange happened. The grief did not disappear, but it changed. It became softer, less solid. It became part of the air around him, no longer a stone in his chest, but a presence he could breathe with. He wept silently in the dark. Tears ran down his face and froze on his cheeks. And when dawn came, pale and cold, he felt lighter than he had in 15 years. Spring arrived slowly in the mountains. The snow began to melt, trickling down the cliffs in thin streams. The path down the mountain became passable again. Green shoots appeared in the garden, and one morning Shugen decided to leave the monastery. He packed a small bag, a change of clothes, a bowl, a blanket. He said goodbye to the other monks, bowing deeply to each of them. Kaio walked with him to the top of the trail, and there they stood together for a moment, looking out at the valley below, still white with snow, but beginning to show patches of brown and green. Shugen gestured, "Thank you." Kaio smiled. He gestured back. The snow was always going to melt. Shugen nodded. He understood now. He had been holding on to something that was never meant to be held. His wife, his daughter, they had been like snow, beautiful, precious, and temporary. And he had spent 15 years trying to keep them from melting, trying to preserve something that was always meant to return to the earth. He bowed one last time, then began the long walk down the mountain. He did not know what he would find in the world below. He did not know if he would return to his village or start a new life elsewhere, but he was no longer afraid. The grief was still with him, would always be with him, but it no longer weighed him down. It moved through him now, like wind, like water, and that was enough. Somewhere between the valley and the ridge, in a place where the path forks and the moss grows thick on the stones, there was a hermit who lived in a small hut made of pine logs and thatched grass. The hut sat in a clearing surrounded by ancient trees, their trunks so wide it would take 3 men with arms outstretched to encircle them. The light here was filtered green and gold, and the air smelled of earth and sap. No one knew the hermit's name. The villagers who occasionally passed his hut on their way to gather mushrooms or wild herbs called him the Silent One, though some simply called him the Old Man of the Ridge. He had lived there for as long as anyone could remember, longer than the oldest grandmother in the village, longer than anyone's memory reached. He did not come down to the village, he did not seek company, but once every few years, someone, usually a traveler or a young seeker, would find their way to his door. One such traveler was a woman named Ayame. She was in her 30s, thin and tired. With dark circles under her eyes, she had been walking for weeks, moving from town to town, carrying only a small pack and a walking stick worn smooth by her grip. She had no destination. She had left her home after her mother's death, unable to stay in the place where every corner, every object, every scent reminded her of what she had lost. Her mother had been sick for a long time, years. Ayame had cared for her, bathing her, feeding her, sitting with her through long nights of pain and confusion. And when her mother finally died, Ayame had felt not relief but a devastating emptiness. So she walked, hoping that motion would ease the ache, the distance would dull the sharpness of her grief. One afternoon, she found herself on a mountain path. She didn't remember deciding to come here. Her feet had simply carried her, following the trail as it wound upward through the forest. The air was cool, the light soft and golden. Birds called from the canopy above. A stream ran alongside the path, its water clear and cold. As the sun began to dip, casting long shadows through the trees, she came upon the hermit's hut. It appeared suddenly, as if it had materialized from the forest itself. Smoke rose from a small chimney. The door was open, just slightly. She hesitated at the edge of the clearing. Then she called out, "Hello." No answer. She stepped closer, her footsteps soft on the moss. "Is anyone here?" Still no answer. She approached the door and looked inside. The interior was simple, a single room with a mat on the floor, a low table, a small fire burning in a pit lined with stones. The hermit sat beside the fire, his back to her. He was very old, his hair white and long, his shoulders bent. He wore a simple robe, patched and faded. "Excuse me," Ayame said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm traveling. May I rest here for the night?" The hermit did not turn, but he raised one hand and gestured, a simple, unhurried movement that seemed to mean, "Come in." Ayame entered slowly, unsure. She set down her pack near the door and sat on the floor near the fire. The warmth was immediate, soaking into her bones. She hadn't realized how cold she had been. The hermit still did not look at her. He simply tended the fire, adding a small piece of wood, adjusting the logs with a stick, watching the flames. Ayame waited. When it became clear he would not speak, she said, "Thank you for letting me stay." The hermit nodded, still without turning. They sat in silence. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, a sound like distant waves. Ayame found herself relaxing, her breath slowing, her shoulders dropping. She had not felt this calm in months, maybe years. After a long time, the hermit reached for a pot that sat beside the fire. He ladled soup into a wooden bowl and handed it to her without a word. She accepted it with both hands, bowing slightly. The bowl was warm against her palms. She looked down at the soup, a simple broth with wild greens and a few small mushrooms. She lifted the bowl to her lips and drank. It tasted like the forest itself, earthy, clean, alive. She ate slowly, savoring each mouthful, and when she finished, she set the bowl down with a sense of deep gratitude. The hermit took the bowl and refilled it from the pot, handing it back to her. She ate again, more slowly this time, and when she was done, she felt full in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. They sat in silence as the fire burned low. Outside, night had fallen completely. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint glow of the fire. Finally, Ayame spoke. "Why do you live alone?" The hermit did not answer at first. She thought perhaps he hadn't heard or didn't want to answer. But then, in a voice so soft it was almost part of the wind, he said, "I live with everything." Ayame frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean?" The hermit gestured toward the open door. "Listen." She listened. She heard the wind moving through the branches. She heard the creak of the trees, old wood settling. She heard the distant call of an owl. She heard the fire crackling, the sound of embers shifting. She heard her own breath, slow and steady. "When you are alone," the hermit said, "you are not lonely. You are with the world." Ayame sat with those words. She had felt so alone since her mother died, so isolated, but sitting here, listening to the night, she realized she had been surrounded by presence all along. The sky, the trees, the wind, the earth beneath her feet. She had been so focused on what she had lost that she had stopped noticing what was still here. She stayed with the hermit for 3 days. They did not speak much. In the mornings, she helped him gather firewood from the forest floor, carrying bundles of dry branches back to the hut. In the afternoons, she sat by the stream and watched the water move over the rocks, the light catching on the surface, fracturing into 1,000 tiny reflections. In the evenings, they ate together by the fire, simple meals of rice and vegetables and broth. On the 3rd night, as they sat watching the flames, Ayame said, "I think I'm ready to go home." The hermit nodded. "Good." "But I'm afraid," she admitted. "I'm afraid the sadness will be too much. I'm afraid I won't be able to bear it." The hermit poked at the fire with a stick, sending up a small shower of sparks. "Sadness is like smoke," he said. "If you hold it inside, it chokes you. If you let it rise, it disappears into the sky." Ayame looked up. Above them, through the opening in the roof where the smoke escaped, she could see stars. Countless stars scattered across the darkness. She understood. The next morning, she packed her things. She bowed to the hermit deeply, holding the bow for a long time. He bowed in return, his movements slow and deliberate. As she walked down the path, she looked back once. He was standing in the doorway of the hut, watching her go. Then he turned and disappeared inside, and the forest swallowed the clearing as if it had never been there at all. She never saw him again, but she carried his words with her, and when the sadness came, as it did many times in waves that threatened to pull her under, she let it rise. She let it move through her and out of her like smoke rising into the wide open sky. And in time, the grief became something she could live with, not something that defined her, but something that moved through her, like wind, like water, like breath. The night has deepened now. The stars have moved across their paths, wheeling slowly through the darkness. The world has grown quieter still, settling into that deep silence that comes only in the hours before dawn. If you are still here, still listening, know that you don't need to hold on any longer. The stories have done their work. They have walked with you, step by step, breath by breath, into this stillness. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to think about, nothing left to solve or understand, only rest. Let your body sink a little deeper into the bed. Let the mattress hold you. Let the pillow cradle your head. Let the blanket settle around you like the earth settling at the end of a long day. Your breath can slow even more now. You don't need to count it. You don't need to control it. Just let it be, in and out, rising and falling, the way it has been since the moment you were born, the way it will continue effortlessly for as long as you need it. The mountains are still there, even if you can't see them. is nowhere you need to go, nothing you need to become. You are already exactly where you need to be. Sleep now. Let yourself go. Let the stories fade into the darkness. Let the words dissolve. Let the night carry you down, deeper and deeper into rest. And know that whatever you need, whatever comfort, whatever peace, will be here when you wake. Rest well, dear friend. The mountain does not hurry, the river does not rush, and neither do you.